Hello and welcome to this week's Rocksmith Developer Stream. I'm your host and the community developer for Rocksmith, Doug Lilly. Very glad to have you all here today with us. What we're going to do, usually we like to talk about music, generally guitar focused, not always. Today will be definitely guitar focused. We're going to talk about gear, specifically pickups. To talk about pickups in just a couple moments, going to introduce our good friend Brian Poedy to talk about how they work, why you might want to use different styles of pickups for different types of sound. That's all coming up soon. We're going to have some song pack giveaways later in the stream. Community guest this week is Casey Blandford, who put together a couple of great songs for us. We're going to hear those towards the end of the stream. And Kihn is going to talk about some different picking techniques. All that's up later. Right now, want to say once more, welcome to the stream and welcome to our guests. Brian Poedy, a technical audio designer here on Rocksmith, as well as Dan Amrich, content editor. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello.
Howdy.
Hello.
Good to be here.
Hi. Brian Poedy, you are a luthier.
Yes.
We'll say, and you not only do you make guitars, you build pickups.
Yeah, pickups are actually like the thing that I started building. And then I kind of moved on to pedals and guitars and amplifiers from there, and now kind of constantly build everything.
Build the tools that you need to build the guitars.
I
keeps going back.
Jigs. Yeah, I feel like sometimes there's more time spent building jigs than actually building instruments.
And we also have Dan Amrich on the call. Dan, a bit of a gearhead.
Well, mostly I just ask Brian Poedy to help me fix the problems that I have with the instruments that I try to build. Literally, the one over my shoulder, this Blueburst Strat, was one that Poedy helped me rescue. It was a very cheap body, and we found out why. It had been miscut in the neck pocket. So I begged Poedy, and Poedy fixed it for me. And now it's one of my favorite playing guitars. But yeah, I have more interest than knowledge when it comes to things like pickups and luthiery. I am not currently a Lutheran, so I don't know.
And if anybody, in addition to Dan and myself, has questions for Brian about pickups, please ask us in the chat. UB Dork is in the chat. She'll be taking questions from you, passing those on to me. So if you want to know anything about what we're talking about here today, feel free to pass those along, and we'll try to get some of those answered. So let's just start off. What is a pickup? How does it work?
It's voodoo black magic.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Well, that's easy. That's good.
Yeah, in a way it is. It's like don't worry about it. It's just black magic. It's a magnet, and it's a bunch of wire wrapped up in a coil, and somehow it turns the vibration of your guitar strings into electricity. And that electricity goes through a wire to your amplifier, and your amplifier makes it louder, and your speakers turn it back into movement. So you end up back where you started. Like, it's all about the movement of air, be it a string or a speaker. But yeah, so the pickup is a bunch of very, very thin wire. It's about like as thick as a hair that's wrapped around usually a coil, like a plastic coil, or bobbin is how it's usually done, and that has metal like slugs or a bar, and then there's a magnet attached to that metal, and that creates a magnetic field, and then the strings pass through that magnetic field, and as the strings move, they disturb it, and as I was saying earlier, that creates AC, electricity.
Sure. So if I don't need to worry about any of that, if I just want to know what kind of pickups to use, if I've got a 6-string guitar, what are my main options?
Your most common things are going to be like a single coil pickup, which is, typically the like Fender Strat land of guitars and tones. And then on the other side, you have humbuckers, which are the like Gibson Les Paul side of the equation. Like, if you're just going to break the world of guitars down into those very two broad categories, that's really the two different styles. Now there's lots of like in between, The humbucker was invented in 1957. Obviously, Gibson was making electric guitars prior to that. So what they were using before that was a P90, which is like a bigger, fatter single coil.
Okay.
For reference, like P90 sized single coil and Strat sized single coil. The P90 has a lot more wire wrapped around it, so it's a bit fatter sounding. It has a bit more output.
Okay. So is that primarily the difference between the P90s and the more modern single coils? And I say modern might be a bit that language might not be quite right, because they're still making P90s. You can still get a new guitar with P90s. So you can build a P90 style pickup. Is what functionally is going to be the difference?
In terms of like what you're hearing, the sounds you're making?
Yeah, like why would you prefer one over the other?
So a single coil, the Fender style, is like spanky, right? It's got a lot of high end. They tend to be lower output, and they typically have weaker magnets. And that combination of low output and a weaker magnetic field tend to give more high end, a little like brighter, more open sound than you would get from the P90, which is higher output. This, I was complaining to Doug earlier, this isn't really a P90. It looks like one, but it's built more like a giant single coil. A true P90 has 2 magnets on it, so it's creating a pretty powerful magnetic field. And that gives you a little bit darker sound, but it also gives you more output, so you're going to push your amp harder. And
okay.
If you're me, pushing the amp and making it miserable is your main goal.
And so the third option with a sort of standard 6-string guitar is going to be the humbucker. So
right.
what functionally separates that from your single coil and P90s?
So the humbucker was essentially trying to solve a problem, right? With a single coil pickup, there's 60 cycle hum. It just kind of picks that up from the environment. So with the humbucker, they were saying, okay, how do we get rid of that hum? Hence the name humbucker. So what they did is they took a P90 and they basically split it in half. The P90 typically has about 10,000 lines of wire around the bobbin. So they said, okay, what if we get 2 bobbins, make them a little smaller, and put 5,000 lines of wire on each of those, and we flip one out of phase with the other. We stick them right next to each other. Then in theory, they're both picking up the noise the same, but since they're not occupying exactly the same space, they'll sense the string a little differently. So that will, in effect, cancel out the hum, but it will still pick up the string. And the result of that flip in phase means you also kind of get some comb filtering, which gives the humbucker its kind of characteristic sound. It's got more mids than you would get from a single coil pickup, and it doesn't go all the time, which is nice.
Right, because it's bucking those hums. It's getting rid of. Okay. So when you're shopping for a guitar, or when you're building a guitar, or upgrading a guitar with new pickups, what sort of considerations should you have in mind for your pickup selections? Do you advise getting a single type of pickup on a guitar, or do you advise having options on the same guitar?
I think it's about like, what's the sound in your head, right? Or who's an artist whose sound you love. And that's always a good starting point for me, is like, okay, how are they making that sound that really resonates with me? So, I'll look at, say, John Petrucci and be like, okay, I know he plays through a cranked up boogie, which is giving him a lot of that sound, but it all starts at the pickups. So what is he sending to that? And, I'll look at what he plays and kind of go from there. And then you can also think of it from kind of the other perspective of what in the sound that I'm making am I lacking? So for me, if I pick up a guitar and I'm like, the pinch harmonics aren't jumping out at this if I look at it,
Which is very important.
I'm like, it is very important.
Yeah.
Don't underestimate
Yeah.
how many pickups I've built to get it just right so that one single guitar will just make nothing but squealy noises. So, you know, if you look at it and you're like, oh, this guitar is too dark, you would look at what are the things that will make the guitar brighter. Ceramic magnets will invariably make a guitar brighter. A pickup that is wound with thinner wire will make it brighter. So those are typically higher output pickups that use those two things. And that'll get you a bit more of that squealiness. Conversely, you could also go to a really low output pickup, and that will be a little more open and bright sounding. So it's kind of about seeing where you are and where you want to be and how to bridge that gap. And for me, looking at how other people are doing it is a really good starting point. Certainly
just following the trail.
Buying thousands of dollars worth of pickups and just swapping them.
Right. Dan, did you have any questions?
I have several questions for Poedy. You mentioned ceramic pickups, as opposed to what? Alnico pickups, right?
But then additionally, Alnico, yes.
Yeah, so that's aluminum, nickel, and cobalt all together in one magnet. But even there, there's different numbers associated with different Alnico pickups because they have different characteristics too. Can you explain? Because I shop for pickups and it's like, oh, that sweet vintage Alnico 2, or Slash prefers Alnico 5, and then you came in and said, oh, I've built this set of Alnico 4s, and that's really the sound that I'm looking for. And I'm just like, what's the difference?
So they all have kind of a different like EQ curve, the way they're sensing the strings. It's funny if you go back in history. I don't totally want to make this a history lesson, but if you look back at like the classic PAF that everybody loves so much, Gibson just ordered bar magnets. They weren't that concerned about what type of Alnico it was, and they just throw them in at random. So you get a mixture of like 2s, 4s, and 5s. Supposedly it's mostly 4s. I'm not answering your question.
It's all right.
That's okay with you.
This is all backstory. It's good.
It is backstory. So that classic sound is kind of hard to nail down. Pickups are really a recipe. But so Alnico 2 is confusingly not the lowest output. Alnico 3 is the lowest output magnet. So Alnico 3 tends to have the most high end. It's the brightest. That's what was usually used in like vintage Strat pickups. Alnico 2 is a little more round on the high end. It's not as pointy. I'm using a lot of words that don't mean anything. So less high end, less treble on an Alnico 2. The bass on an Alnico 2 tends to be less controlled. So, if this is your low end and this is your high end, an Alnico 2 is kind of a little like this. Conversely, an Alnico 5 has a much more controlled bass response and is going to have a little more high end. It's going to be tighter and a little bit brighter. They're kind of scooped, the mid-range, the happy face that we all love. There's a boogie back there with the graphic EQ that's out of focus, but make it a smiley face. That's more what the Alnico 5 is like. And then an Alnico 4 is actually the flattest of all of them. It's the most neutral. For a traditional PAF, like vintage sound, I actually really like the Alnico 4s. That's what I tend to use if I'm building that type of pickup. There's also Alnico 6, which almost nobody uses, and I can't remember off the top of my head what its EQ curve is really like. And then there's the Alnico 8, which is the most powerful of the Alnico magnets that's at least commonly available. And those are also relatively flat, but similar loud to an Alnico 4, but louder. Yeah. That's what's in my Ibanez that's over there, because it worked really well in that guitar.
I do have a question from the chat. This is from Jean. is this the same for P90s? Is this the same across all styles of pickups, or is this
It
exclusive?
is, yeah. So I mean, all of those pickups are going to have their own characteristics of being built the way that they are. But if everything else is the same, if you have a single coil pickup that has a 5K impedance and it has Alnico 3 magnets versus a single coil pickup that has a 5K impedance that has Alnico 5 magnets, then the Alnico 3 is going to be a little brighter, and the Alnico 5 is going to have like a tighter bass and is going to be more scooped sounding.
So this is all fine tuning.
Yeah, I mean,
with it.
pretty much everything is fine tuning.
Sure.
I will say swapping out a magnet is one of the most dramatic things you can do.
Really?
Like if you have a pickup and you're like, this isn't quite working, and you stick a different magnet in, it can be fairly dramatic.
Okay.
Now, that is something that you told me that you could do like 2 years ago, and you're like, oh, well, if you like everything else about the pickup, but maybe you should put 4s in there instead of Alnico 5s. And I'm like, what do you mean take the magnet out? Because, opening up a thing and pulling something out of a coil of wire is nothing I've been like, screw it, I'm going to see what's on sale at Musician's Friend, or worse yet, AliExpress. So when you talk about pulling a magnet out, do you have to rewrap the pickup, all that very fine wire that you were talking about? And for that matter, how the hell did you get into building pickups instead of just buying them like the rest of the world?
First question first.
Yeah.
Don't please do this on a single coil pickup, because on a single coil, the wire is literally wrapped around the magnets. So if you try to push the magnet out, you're almost certainly going to break the wire and you'll just have a dead pickup. On a humbucker, the wire is wound around a plastic bobbin. That bobbin is screwed down onto a base plate. If I was smart, I've got like a box full of random pickup pieces
in the other room. Yeah
it's out in the shop. So they're screwed onto the base plate with 4 screws. If you just loosen those 4 screws up, you can get the bobbins to just pop up a little bit, and then the magnet is just between the bobbins and it slides right out, and it has
it's just
nothing
sitting
to
there.
do
It's not like
with the wire.
not soldered in or anything like that. It's the magnet is
No,
just sort of tucked in there.
Yeah, if the pickup is wax potted, which usually they will be, then there might be a little bit of wax that's holding it in place, but that's it.
All right.
And your second question was, how did I get into building pickups?
Yeah.
Maybe that's why I've ended up as a sound designer, but I have like a very specific sound in my head, and I'm very picky about achieving that sound. And buying a lot of pickups was really prohibitive, because pickups aren't cheap, right?
No.
They're expensive. So I was looking at how much it costs to make them, and I was like, well, I can probably do that. Like, I don't have that much to lose if I just try.
Right.
And so my first winder was a fishing reel, like the cheapest one I could find at Walmart, that I just screwed onto a piece of plywood, and I just fed the wire through by hand. I don't know how many times I broke the wire, like building my first pickup, and then I just like scrape the insulation off and tape it back to twist it together and tape it and like keep going. And it took hours. It took so long. But I eventually finished it, and I put it in guitar, and I went, oh, that's exactly what I was looking for.
Oh, well, that's good. At least it was worth it.
Yeah, so it just kind of took off from there. And the other thing I did with that winder was like calculated how many times the bobbin would spin around for one turn of the crank, and it was something like 3.3 or some inconvenient number. And I got like a reed switch from an old bike computer, so every time a magnet went by, it would close the reed switch, and I soldered that to the equals button on a calculator. Nice. So every time it swung around past the reed switch, the calculator would like count up, because I just went, plus 3.3 equals, and it would just hit the equals button and it would keep going up. But that also meant that I couldn't go that fast, because it didn't respond
Right.
very quickly. So I had to wind it really slowly. And now I've built myself one that has like a nice motor and it has a real counter, so I can wind a bobbin in like a minute or two.
Wow.
So if somebody was interested in building their own pickup, what would you recommend how would you recommend someone get started? Like buy a kit, or how you got started, which was just figuring out what the equipment was that you needed and the tools that you needed to put those ingredients together?
Yeah, so like a kit of the parts to build the pickup is, I don't know, $20 or $30. It's not that bad, and that'll have the bobbins and your screws and the base plate and all of that. The wire can be fairly expensive. I tend to buy it by the pound, which will wind several pickups. You can also buy like a quarter pound of wire. It's still about another like $20 or $25 to do that. The expensive part is the winder. Going to StewMac or somebody to buy a winder is about $400, which is why I built one out of a fishing reel, because I wanted to see what I could do with minimal investment up front.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's hard if you're not like, I'm super dedicated to this and I'm ready to drop $500 right now.
Because I don't want to buy a $120 aftermarket pickup. So
exactly.
Yeah.
But if you're going to build, the hundreds of pickups, then,
of
then
course,
the investment makes sense.
Yeah.
So another question from John in the chat: does the amount of wire wrapped around the magnet change the output?
Yeah. So there's a lot of factors involved. The magnet changes the output. All other things being equal. So that's always the thing with a pickup. Changing one thing has an impact. Changing a different thing can have that same impact. If you're changing multiple things, then you're all over the board. But if you change nothing else, adding more wire will make the output higher.
Okay.
It will also make the pickup darker. So then you end up changing something else to make it kind of sound the same, but have that higher output that you were looking for. So the other thing you can do is, a PAF humbucker, a vintage humbucker, was wound with 42 gauge wire. You can go up to 43 gauge wire, and you can put on the same number of winds. So you end up tonally similar, but you've raised the impedance because you have more wire, and you've also raised the output a bit. So it's very much a recipe. There's tons of things involved. You also have pole pieces, and the amount of carbon in the steel of the pole piece changes how bright or dark the pickup is too. So you can get screws made of tons of different alloys that influence the tonal character of the pickup.
So
brass base plates are darker than nickel base plates.
So every ingredient in this recipe dramatically impacts, it seems.
I mean, some are more subtle than others. Like the pole pieces are pretty subtle. To my ear, the biggest thing is the magnet. Then the next thing is how many winds of which type of wire. And then you kind of fine tune from there with pole pieces. The other thing that I like to do, and I know like Seymour Duncan and DiMarzio do this, is they mismatch the coils. So the coils aren't exactly the same. So by making the coils not exactly the same, you actually lose some of the humbucking that you get from the humbucker, but it also kind of creates a more open sound. And
almost like a stereoscopic kind of.
Yeah, sure. You can describe it like that. I like that. But yeah, it unbalancing it gives it this whole other character that you can't get from balanced pickups. Like a completely 100% balanced pair of pickups is gonna sound almost like sterile.
Okay.
And that's almost impossible to do, right? Like even a machine winder is gonna be a little bit off. And the old vintage Gibson winders, they didn't have like a shutoff. The only thing that was automated was how they went left and right. So, if somebody got distracted, they're going to wind a way, way hotter pickup than if they're like, oh, I'm really concerned about how much I'm putting on this.
Just
so that's why they're all different.
Okay.
I hear so many vintage stories like that where it's like, oh, but they did it this way at this factory, and it was like, except for when they didn't. Like there was really a lot of, from what I understand, there was a lot of variance depending on who was running the winder, what their personal preferences were, what else was going on in the world. Like, what's her name? Abigail Ibarra, I think, from Fender. She's like legendary. Oh, you want Abigail's pickups. You want her pickups. It's like, well, she just had her way of doing it that consistently, when people found out that she was the person that built those pickups across the board, people are like, well, I like that sound, so she must be the best. Yeah. And, it's not that other people didn't do it that way, or how did she come to doing it the way? It was just the way that she did it. It's not like she went, this will be perfect for vintage tone, Like there's so many things. But I do have to ask real quick, sorry, Doug. We talked earlier about the myth of tone woods, right? Like we bring this up every once in a while, but we were on a stream together where we talked about, can you hear a difference between a maple neck and a rosewood neck, or a mahogany body and an ash body and an alder body and all that stuff? And we sort of came up with the feeling that there's not that much of a dramatic difference between the types of woods used in an electric guitar. It's much more of personal preference. It's much more of how it feels or weighs or cuts or whatever it is. But like you're not going to get a huge difference. However, you're saying there is a huge difference between 42 and 43 gauge wire, a brass base plate versus a nickel base plate, the alloy of the screws. Whereas, like, a lot of times I see conversations where, of course, it's the internet. Everybody knows everything because of their gear, right? Like, it's representative of the world. So you got people out there absolutely dying on the hill that you have to have this component and that component. But you're saying it actually does make a difference. This is where those little subtle differences are more likely to actually be measurable or observable and not just snake oil.
Right. Well, I mean, this is the thing that's turning the vibration of the strings into the signal that goes to your amp.
This is where the music comes from.
Well, that comes from here, Dan.
Silly me. Okay, so this is much more science and provable science than you might find in a tone wood argument.
Yeah, I still think it's voodoo, but
I mean, I'm
but there's a little bit of logic to the voodoo. Sure.
Okay, but it's replicatable.
Yeah.
To
a point, since they tend to be wound by hand. There's always some variance. Sure. If you want to get to something that's completely replicable, the new Fishman Fluence pickups are excuse me. They're done on a PCB, so the like copper is actually just printed on the PCB, and then they stack them, so they're all like exactly the same, which is kind of wild. I have a set here that I put in a guitar for a coworker that I haven't played around with that much, but conceptually they're really cool, and they're like
interesting,
totally the same from one to another, which is neat.
So we've got the three main styles of pickups for your kind of standard 6-string electric guitar, and I know this is
Jazzmaster one here too.
Tell us about the Jazzmaster pickups.
I don't really know about these. They look
That's
weird.
A Jaguar pickup.
Oh, is it Dan's right. It's a Jaguar pickup. It's that weird offset world that I'm like not that knowledgeable about, but Dan is.
Yeah.
I say that, and like 2 out of the 4 guitars behind me that I built are offset because I was talking to Dan a lot when I was designing
those.
That's
right, man. Offsets are where it's at, baby. Yeah, Jaguars and Jazzmasters both have single coil designs, but they were slightly different ones that Leo Fender did after he had done the classic Strat and Telecaster pickups. The Jazzmasters are big bricks. They look like oversized P90s. They're very flat and very wide. And then the Jaguars, you can tell the Jaguar pickups are specific. The one that Poedy had in his hand have little metal teeth on the sides. And that's what, but they are a single coil pickup. It's just, a slightly different. They're also very bright, very twangy. Surf guitar is very much the Jaguar sound. So if that helps. But you were going to say something, Doug, and I hope it's going to be my agenda.
It might be, and I know this is frequently more of a consideration for bass guitar pickups, but active or passive?
It's not my agenda.
I don't know what your agenda is. So and I know some electric guitars are active, most are passive.
I mean, the Fishmans I was just talking about are active pickups.
So what do we look? What's the functionally to the sort of end user? What's the difference?
So an active pickup has a preamp built either into the pickup or in your control cavity somewhere. I have a lovely blue Ibanez bass. Thank you, Dan and John. Here in my office, and so usually a guitar, and these are the kind of things that I measure for fun. Usually a guitar will put out around 100 millivolts. If you take that Ibanez bass and you crank all the controls up to 10, it'll put out 1.4 volts, which is 14 times more. That's a ton of output. So active pickups give you more output, which will push your amp harder if that's what you're looking to do. Another cool thing about active pickups that you don't get quite so much with passive pickups is their lower impedance. So if you have a low impedance output, you can drive a longer cable length without losing so much high end. So if you want to get nerdy,
let's do it.
Why stop now?
So because a guitar cable or an instrument cable, it's wire with a jacket around it, like a copper jacket. That's the shield. The longer that cable is, the more capacitance it adds to your signal. And as you add capacitance, you roll off high end. That's why some people will only use a 3-foot guitar cable, because they're like, anything over 3 feet I can hear. I just have to stand right next to my amp. Otherwise, my tone is going to be garbage. So if you have a low impedance output from your instrument driving that cable run, you don't lose as much high end. So that's something that you gain from active pickups. You can also just put a buffer in your signal. I have one not in my office right now. Well, I do have one in my office, but it's on a breadboard and it's a mess. So a buffer pedal, like the Cornish buffer is really famous. The Klon, obviously the Klon Centaur is the mythical overdrive pedal that has a buffer in it. And that Klon buffer is really good. People sell just that buffer. That does the same thing. It takes your high impedance signal from your instrument and it turns it into a low impedance signal, so you can then drive all the patch cables in your pedal board and not lose so much high end. The third cool thing about active pickups is, usually a passive instrument, the tone control will be passive. So it's usually a low pass filter. It's just rolling off high end. So you're taking your beautiful pure signal and you're taking part of it away and you're saying, I don't want you anymore. But if you have an active instrument, you can actually take those signals that you love so much and you can boost them. So you're giving more signal instead of taking signal away.
Okay.
So
interesting.
I have an active set of EMG Strat pickups, the purple guitar that I used to play in the office. That's the David Gilmour EMG set. And instead of the standard wiring thing, there's a master volume control, and there's a 9-volt that I tucked in the back in the spring cavity, in the tremolo cavity, since I generally don't like to use the tremolos on my Strats anyway. So I removed some of the springs and literally replaced it with a lithium battery. But the two tone controls are cut and boost for exactly what he's talking about. One of them is a mid boost, and the other one is a scoop. It's very so. Actually, even though they are very similar in like the frequencies that they cover it in two different ways, so you can dial them in, and I get all kinds of different things that I don't normally hear in a passive guitar. I don't use it very much, but it's basically like having a tiny little preamp in your guitar. That's the easiest way to think of it. Like, if you had a pedal on the ground that you wanted to shape the EQ, I can do that EQ shaping from the guitar, and I can do it a lot more dramatic changes because I have a battery in the guitar powering those active pickups.
Yep.
Got a couple more questions from the chat before I need to let you go.
No,
Brian.
my agenda is going to be brought up at the end of the user questions.
That's fine. That's fine. So we have both some of the questions from Jonathan Gustavo Acosta Ramon, as well as our community guest today, Casey Blandford. Jonathan asked copper or gold for the wires of the pickups, while Casey asked any components typical for lower cost guitar versus higher end guitar. So if you're putting money into pickups, where is that money going components wise?
The wire's copper. There's a bunch of different insulations. Heavy Forvmar is what Fender used to use. It's a thicker wire, so there's more space in between all your coils, which also changes the tone. We didn't get into that earlier, but that'll make for a brighter pickup. Gibson used plain enamel coated wire, and on vintage pickups, that stuff is expensive. It's also beautiful, and I love it. And the more common wire that you see in modern pickups is a poly coated wire. It probably doesn't make any difference, but that's the differences in wire. In terms of like where you're gonna cut corners and cost savings, I don't have like the pickups that I have here are generally cheap pickups, except for the one I made, which is beautiful. But so what you'll see that's really typical is a true like vintage style single coil pickup is, as we were saying before, it's copper wound around a bobbin, and this bobbin is made of like a fiber board, and the magnets are the pole pieces are actually magnets, and they're pressed into the fiberboard, and it's a pain in the butt. I don't enjoy making these. So what you'll see on cheaper guitars, particularly with single coil pickups, is the bobbin is just one molded piece of plastic. The pole pieces are just slugs of metal. They're not magnets. And then on the back, there's just a magnet that's like hot glued onto the back.
That is exactly what I'm showing. Yeah.
Okay.
I happen to have a very low-end Stratocaster pickguard here with pre-wired, and everything you're talking. The bobbin is plastic. There's a giant bar magnet on the back that just looks like it's just glued there, and they just shoved the pole pieces onto it. So.
Yeah. So you save costs there. In terms of humbuckers, brass base plates are cheaper. That doesn't mean they're bad. DiMarzio like almost exclusively uses brass base plates. They just tune their pickups to use that. The ceramic magnets are generally cheaper. That doesn't make them bad.
That's the thing. Yeah, I think ceramic got a bad rep because so many people making cheap guitars used ceramic pickups. So therefore, this myth came out that ceramic pickups are terrible and you should only be using Alnico 5s. And as Poedy mentioned before, ceramic gives a different sound than an Alnico. I've got 2 sets of Seymour Duncan pickups that look cosmetically exactly the same. One is an Alnico 5 and one is a ceramic. And the ceramic kicks like a mule. It's like there's nothing wrong with that sound at all. In fact, I reach for that guitar when I'm recording things where I want extra aggression. 2 Weeks to Live, which Poedy played on. I did all of my parts with a ceramic bridge pickup. It sounded exactly the way I wanted it to sound. But because it had been abused, particularly in the 60s and the 70s with the British guitar band boom, and the Beatles came out and everybody had to put out a cheap guitar to make money, a lot of them used really questionable materials, and the cheapest things they could find were ceramic pickups. So what you had were people not making pickups with the right spirit, and then using the cheapest possible components and making really terrible sounding pickups. But in the right hands, in Seymour Duncan's hands and Brian Poedy's hands, a ceramic magnet is absolutely fine, but it's a different sound.
Yeah, I like ceramic magnets quite a bit. Other things are just materials. ABS bobbins are cheaper than the like vintage butyrate bobbins, which for some reason butyrate smells like vomit, but it's highly sought after.
Isn't it highly flammable as well?
I think it is flammable
butyrate
too.
is highly flammable.
Just be careful.
Yeah. I mean, that's what's in like my Les Paul, but Yeah, don't light your guitar on fire unless you're Jimi Hendrix, and then you can do whatever you like.
That's right.
So yeah, there's little things like that. None of that's a huge cost saving measure, though.
Okay. Thank you, Brian. Dan, what's your agenda?
All right, my agenda. Thank you, Your Honor. I wanted to bring out that, of course, I knew it wasn't going to get mentioned. We talked about single coils, we talked about P90s, and we talked about even different kinds of single coils, and we talked about humbuckers. We did not talk about mini humbuckers. And I am part of the Mini Humbucker Defense League. That's right. When I put together this blue Strat that Poedy helped me with, this actually speaks to something you were talking about earlier, Doug. I found that those Seymour Duncan pickups I was talking about that I have are all mini humbuckers. Mini humbuckers are exactly what they sound like. They're a humbucking design, but they're smaller. The coils are closer together. That makes them brighter. I was looking for something not as sharp and shrill as a single coil, and not as like boomy or muddy as sometimes humbuckers can be. It was too bassy in an Alnico 5. And, I didn't know about any of the rest of it. By dumb luck, I bought a guitar that I thought looked cool that had mini humbuckers in it, and that was the sound in my head. So there is a middle ground between, it's like Goldilocks, like, this humbucker is too muddy and this single coil is too shrill. And I have found that what I like is that middle ground. And when I put this guitar together, Mad Al, who you know from the Rocksmith community, had suggested I was looking to make the cheapest possible guitar because I thought I was going to screw everything up and make it unplayable, and I would literally just throw everything away. These are Wilkinson mini humbuckers, and what's interesting is the output is it's very vintage, it's very low end. Oh, is that one of the Wilkinsons?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. These are $30 a piece, so you do not have to break the bank to get a quality pickup, but most people are not looking here. I was like, yeah, great, $90 for 3 pickups. That's awesome. There is no difference in the output. Like, they're all about 5.7K output or something like that. Out of a sense of tradition, I put the weakest one in the neck and the strongest one in the bridge, but we were talking, decimal points. They still sound different because of where they are when the string is vibrating over them. So I knew I wanted that sweet sort of vintagey sound, so I didn't want a high output humbucker. And this has worked really, really well. I have the middle one a little bit lower than the bridge and the neck, so right there it's a little mellower of a sound too. This worked out really well. So what you were talking before about, do you put all the different kinds of pickups? Do you do single hum, or do you do hum single hum, or should you do all single coils or all humbuckers or whatever? I did all minis, but they still sound different enough to me that it totally works. So yes, you can mix and match different kinds of pickups. Steve Morse famously has 4 pickups in his production model. But yeah, I mean, I'm constantly saying don't forget about minis, even though they are an acquired taste. But I think because they're not single coils or humbuckers, a lot of people are afraid of them, because what if I get them and I hate them, and they're a funny shape, and sometimes they're difficult to install. They were designed to directly replace P90s, so if you have a P90 guitar and for some reason you don't like that, because I personally love the P90 sound, and a lot of people, it's wild and sort of aggressive, and while being a single coil, Billy Joe Armstrong, big P90 guy, you can do a direct replace with a mini humbucker and sort of check it out, but most people don't want to, and I'm just here to say don't be afraid. If you see a mini humbucker, you might actually like what it does, especially if you find yourself in that Goldilocks position where you just don't know what's just right for you.
I think part of the issue with the public persona of the mini humbucker was the Norlin era Gibsons too, right?
Low end,
where
right?
Gibson was making kind of okay guitars. But what everyone really wanted was a vintage Gibson, and the vintage Gibson had humbuckers in it. So everyone would tear the mini humbuckers out and they'd route it out for humbuckers and stick them in there and be like, it's better now. But the mini humbuckers were good enough for Thin Lizzy and Pete Townsend, right?
Pete Townsend was certainly the guy that put him on the map for me. But yeah, at the time they were seen as a budget option, and Gibson still wasn't giving the audience what they wanted at that point in the history. They're like, but we have a lot of these, and we want to get them out the door, And so,
yeah, because when they bought Epiphone, they just got all of the mini humbuckers that Epiphone had made.
Yeah. So again, there's a lot, and we didn't talk about gold foil. which kind of has its own little cult. There are different designs. Oh, did you make a gold foil?
No,
or the rails. Yes, the stacked rails.
Yeah, the mini humbucker that fits in like a single coil position, which are neat.
Well, I think we're going to have you back, Brian. There's a lot more pickups to talk about, and we haven't even touched on bass or acoustic electrics.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So the world.
I'm always happy to nerd out about guitars. It's basically kind of what's always happening in my brain anyway.
Well,
this
perfect.
just gives me an opportunity to like.
We have just the place for you. Thank you so much, Brian, for being here. Brian, Poedy, everyone. Dan, thank you for being here and supplying us with questions and some experience. Because again, gear, I do not have the gearhead part of my brain developed properly. So this all helps very much. Yeah, it'll get there. I've only been playing for, I won't say how long, for a while. Thank you for being here, Brian. Thank you, Dan. Now we are going to say hello to our community guest. Casey Blandford is back. He's done a couple songs for you. We're going to hear one of those right now. After that, we will hear from another Rocksmith staffer, Kihn, who's going to go over a variety of picking techniques. After that, we're going to do a giveaway, and we'll have more content after that. So you see you in just a little bit.
Hey everyone, it's Casey. You might know me as CJ Blanford in other Rocksmith communities. Hope everyone's doing okay. It's been a while since I've been on the stream, but it's good to be back. I want to thank Doug and everyone at Ubisoft for letting me perform for you today. We're going to take a trip back to the 90s. I'm going to play 2 songs that I learned poorly back then, and I can play them only slightly better now. So let's see how it goes.
masterful performance.
Hey everybody, Kihn here. I've been a developer on the Rocksmith team since about 2016, and today I'm here to talk to you about picking. I get a lot of questions from students regarding this topic, and today I want to delve into like the three most common picking techniques: downstrokes, alternate picking, and economy picking. We'll talk a little bit about each, and I want to show you some of the ideal scenarios for each technique. So I hope you enjoy the video, and let's get to it. Okay, let's talk about downstrokes and using only downstrokes when playing rhythm. So it's not the most efficient way to pick, but when you're using only downstrokes, playing like rock rhythm on the low strings, especially using palm mutes, it's going to give you the most consistent, uniform like attack every single time, because when I do the downstroke, the pick is striking the string at the exact same place every time, which gives you that uniformity. Now I can do the same thing using alternate, and you're going to, it's going to have a different feel to it. Same thing with single notes. That's downstrokes. Here's alternate. So if you're looking for that kind of brute force, just like, the same every single time, downstrokes on rhythm is a great way to go. Alternate picking is a more efficient catch-all picking technique. With alternate picking, when you're going between down and upstrokes with your picking hand, you have the ability to play faster, you have more flexibility, and you can usually tackle most difficult picking scenarios that occur in a song. So it's something to have a good foundation in. Most people don't have an issue alternate picking on one string. It's just a simple matter of keeping even rhythm and even down upstrokes. Most people have issues though when it comes to skipping over strings and changing your pick direction as you navigate over strings. So let's take a simple figure here to illustrate what I'm talking about. I'm going to take an octave, skip over the A string. I'm doing a down, up, and that's where the challenge comes, is skipping between the E and the D strings in this case, with a down followed by an upstroke. So, once you get the hang of it, you should not have any rhythmic gaps. It should be fully smooth when skipping over that string. Another scenario you might see in a song is the opposite, skipping over a string going from an up to a down. We can illustrate that with the same figure. I'm just going to displace the top note, move it back 1/16, and we'll get that picking pattern. Down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. Essentially the same figure, but again, I'm dealing with that string skip differently. So you want to be equally adept at both of those, going from a down up over the string skip and also an up down. So you can't really tell the difference, because you'll find both scenarios in a lot of famous songs. Riffs, obviously soloing. So another actually ideal application for alternate picking is to pick 2-note per string patterns, which of course we could look at the pentatonic scale here. Not really warmed up yet, I apologize. But yeah, in that case you have 2 notes per string, so you're going to always have a down, up, which means every string you start with the downstroke, which makes it a lot easier. You don't have to think about it. And that's a nice pentatonic pattern, going 3 strings at a time. Obviously, I could change the left-hand notes. That's irrelevant. We're just talking about the right hand for now. So those are a couple scenarios alternate picking works great for. Works great for a lot of other things. But I do want to move on to economy picking. So let's talk about a 3-note per string scale pattern. I mean, this is the common example that people show when they're talking about the benefits of economy picking over alternate picking. So if I do, here's a 3-note per string major scale. Quite a simple pattern, but the picking hand is, you know, it's a little complicated because you got to go down, up, down, up, down, up. So the first string transition is covered by a down, up scenario. And then when I'm going from the A to the D string, down, up, down, or I'm sorry, up, down, up, down. So that would be covered by an up, down, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, and so forth. Now, that's fine, but you are limited a little bit when it comes to like blazing Yngwie style, you know, shredding. Because there's only, you know, it's only so fast you can go going from a down to an up across adjacent strings. I should say that too. Economy picking, I can't think of a scenario that it wouldn't be used on adjacent strings, so bear that in mind. Now, here's the shortcut. Here's the economy picking shortcut. I'm going to go down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, down. In other words, I'm doing a double down over the string transition. Which gives you a little bit more speed, right? Because I don't have to change the momentum of my picking hand as I'm transitioning the string. So economy picking is great for that. It's also great for other like repeating patterns on adjacent strings. For instance, you know, something like you might find like a lick like this by doing double downs again. Down, pull off, down, down, not down up there. Super common type of style, you know. That's kind of a cool dime baggy type of lick that I used to do all the time, where I'm taking like a scale fragment and just going up the neck. We'll just take it in 12th position here. So I'm doing 2 pull-offs there, right? A down on the B string, and then another down, up, down. So pull off, pick, 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 pull off, pick, pick, pick. And again, string transition is covered by a down, down. So there you have it. Those are some common picking scenarios that you might find, and I hope I sort of just scratched the surface, but perked your interest up so you can do more research on this. Obviously, there's way more scenarios. Those are just some easy ones to illustrate here, and yeah, that's it.
And welcome back to a live portion of today's Rocksmith Developer Stream. I am still your host and community developer on Rocksmith, Douglas Lilly. That was Kihn, giving you an overview of some different picking styles. Before that, we heard from Casey Blandford, our community guest this week, playing Fell on Black Days by Soundgarden. Well before that, we heard from Brian Poedy with Dan Amrick, giving a pretty broad overview of different pickup styles for your electric guitar. Right now, we want to give away some song packs. So if you are in the chat live right now and you have Rocksmith 2014 on Steam, look, we're going to give away, we're just going to drop 5 codes into the chat. This is going to be for the Riot Girl Song Pack. Again, this is first come, first serve on Steam. So if you see a code, grab it. This song pack includes Babes in Toyland, Bruise Violet, L7's Pretend We're Dead, and Slater Kinney's Dig Me Out. So all of those can be yours if you grab one of these codes. Again, 5 codes being dropped in the chat. First come, first serves. Right now, we've got one more song from Casey Blandford. This is Blue on Black.
masterful performance.
And that is our stream for today. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. Again, I want to say thank you to Casey Blandford for playing the songs for us, for being with us. Again, you can find him CaseyBlandford.com. He's a visual artist. You can find his portfolio there. I also want to say thank you to Kihn for giving us that picking overview, and to Dan Emmerich and Brian Poedy for having that lovely conversation about pickups. Also, I want to say thank you to Baja, that's UBDork in the chat, for getting us questions, for giving away those codes, and for helping moderate. We will see you in a couple weeks. If you want to talk to us, we're on Facebook, facebook.com/Rocksmith. You can also find us on Instagram and Twitter @RocksmithGame. Otherwise, we'll see you here in a couple weeks. Bye, everybody.